So, what do the City of London, the Red Cross, and Taiwan's unofficial embassies all have in common? Well, they're all part of this quiet revolution that's literally changing the very definition of diplomacy. And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
You know, for centuries, the rules of the game were pretty simple. Nations talk to other nations. They do it through ambassadors, through embassies. But let's be real, in the world we live in now, with these huge global cities, powerful tech companies, and crises that don't care about borders, that old playbook isn't just outdated, it's actually failing us.
The first big crack in the old foundation is realizing that the guest list for global politics has totally changed. It is no longer just nations sitting at the big table. We're in a world where international organizations, massive cities, and even non-state political groups have a huge influence on what happens. The old system, it was built only for countries, and it just doesn't know what to do with these new players. And it's not just who's at the table anymore, it's how they're all talking to each other. A lot of these new relationships, and honestly, even some of the old ones between states, they just don't follow the old script of formal treaties and grand alliances. They need a much more flexible, nimble approach, and that old, rigid rulebook, it just can't keep up.
Okay, so if the old model is breaking down, what's starting to grow in the cracks? Well, that brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today, quasi-diplomacy. It's the name we're giving to this new, and yeah, much more complicated, landscape.
To put it simply, quasi-diplomacy is basically all the ways that international players talk to each other when they can't, or maybe just won't, use the official channels of embassies and ambassadors. It's the diplomacy that's happening in all those gray areas, you know? The stuff that exists just outside the traditional lines of statehood.
So, what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, think about Taiwan's economic and cultural representative offices. I mean, let's face it, they're embassies in everything but name. Or maybe a special envoy who's sent in to negotiate a critical ceasefire. It can even be a city like London working directly with New York on something like climate policy. All of that's quasi-diplomacy in action.
And here's the really crucial point. These things aren't just clever little workarounds anymore. They've become an absolutely essential part of how our world actually functions. This isn't the weird exception. It has become the new normal.
So you have to ask, why is this happening now? What's really fueling this massive expansion? Let's break down the key global forces that are pushing quasi-diplomacy right to the center of the stage.
Okay, so there are basically 5 big drivers pushing this whole shift. First, you've got more entities out there with contested statehood, think Kosovo or Taiwan, that still need to engage with the world. Second, you have these incredibly powerful regions and cities that are demanding their own voice. Third, the massive cost and the security risks of running a full-blown embassy are making countries look for leaner, smarter alternatives. Fourth, our world is just so interconnected that big problems like climate change demand that everyone is part of the conversation. And finally, sometimes officially recognizing another entity is just too politically explosive, which makes these informal channels absolutely essential.
Right, so with this explosion of new diplomacy, you've got a whole new set of players, and they're bringing a brand new toolkit for how they engage at each other on the world stage.
And the difference is just stark. Traditional diplomacy was always state-led, it was centered on the embassy, and it was often really rigid. Quasi-diplomacy, though, it's this network of cities, organizations, and special missions, and they're using flexible, digital, and hybrid methods. We are literally watching a fundamental shift from a stiff hierarchy to a dynamic, interconnected web.
But, and this is a huge but, this super fast evolution is creating a massive problem, and it's captured perfectly in this quote. The way diplomacy is actually being done is changing way faster than the international laws that are supposed to govern it. We're pretty much making up the rules as we go along.
I mean, think about it. Legal frameworks like the famous Vienna Convention were designed for a world where the only players that mattered were nation-states. So they just don't have clear answers for today's questions, like what legal protections does a representative from a non-state group even have? It creates all this legal and political ambiguity, and that can be really dangerous.
So this is where it gets really interesting. This new world of quasi-diplomacy isn't just all good or all bad. It's a complete double-edged sword. It's this delicate balancing act between huge opportunities on one side and some very serious risks on the other.
On the one hand, this new approach gives us incredible flexibility. It can allow for life-saving talks to happen even when formal ties between countries are completely broken. But on the other hand, that same lack of structure can lead to total confusion, or worse. Imagine a special envoy from a non-state group gets detained. What legal protections do they have?
The unclear rules just create a much higher risk of miscalculation and potentially conflict. Now, I know this all might sound very high-level, very abstract, but the truth is, quasi-diplomacy has a direct impact on the systems that shape our daily lives. So, let's connect the dots here.
You know those agreements that allow planes to fly safely between two places that have no formal diplomatic ties? Yep, that's quasi-diplomacy. Those secret back channels that are used to coordinate against global threats. Or the ones that deliver aid during a crisis in some contested region. All of it, every single bit, relies on these flexible, informal structures. They are the essential and often invisible wiring that keeps our interconnected world from falling apart.
So, at the end of the day, what's the big takeaway here? It's this. We aren't moving towards a world without formal diplomacy. No, not at all. Instead, we're moving to a world where formal diplomacy is just one layer among many. The future is complex, it's messy, and is definitely multi-layered.
And that leaves us with one final, and I think really crucial question. In a world where all these lines between state and non-state, formal and informal, just keep getting blurrier, what does the word diplomacy truly mean anymore? And maybe more importantly, how are we going to use it to build peace in the incredibly complex world of tomorrow?